There comes a moment in every major shipyard in the world when a steel structure weighing hundreds of thousands of tons must do something that seems to defy intuition. It must float, not in pieces, not gradually, all at once. And the test takes place somewhere that, until that moment, was completely dry. A ship the size of a skyscraper laid on its side is not built in the water. No crane can lift it into the ocean. No ramp can lower it without deforming the hull. The solution developed by modern naval engineering seems contradictory at first. To build an object that will spend its life in water, the water must first be removed from its path. The construction site lies below sea level, isolated by gates and drained to the last centimeter. The ship is born at the bottom of a dry basin, and when it is ready, the ship does not go to the ocean. The ocean is brought to it. Today, you will discover how thousands of tons of steel, cut into separate blocks, are transformed into a structure capable of floating without sinking, capsizing, or breaking in half. And by the end, you will understand why the most critical moment in the entire construction process is not the welding of the blocks or the launching of the hull, but a few precise minutes when the ship begins to support itself. At the beginning of the 15th century, shipbuilding relied on a technique known as careening. The vessel was deliberately run aground on a firm, sandy beach at high tide. When the tide receded, the hull was exposed, leaning to one side. Workers used the few available hours to scrape away barnacles, caulk the planks, and repair damage. When the tide returned, all work stopped. They had to wait for another tidal cycle before continuing. It was an era when the size of a ship was limited by what could be laid on its side on a beach. An account from 1434 describes the procedure being used on the Grace Dieu, the warship of King Henry V of England. On a muddy stretch near Southampton, a temporary wall of timber, brushwood, and clay was built around the hull. The method worked, but it was fragile, slow, and entirely dependent on the tides. The turning point came in 1495. King Henry VII of England ordered the construction of Europe's first permanent dry dock in Portsmouth. It was a basin lined with timber and stone, sealed off from the sea by a temporary embankment of rock and clay. Whenever a ship had to be released, the embankment had to be excavated by hand. The operation took roughly 29 days, with crews working continuously, day and night, to keep pace with the tide. The same dock, now modernized, remains in operation today. For the next 3 centuries, naval engineering kept running into the same limitation. The docks grew larger. The drainage pumps, powered first by animals and later by steam engines, became increasingly powerful. But the ship itself was still built as a single structure. The keel was laid at the bottom of the dock, and the hull grew upward and outward over months or years, always in the same place and always in the same way. The problem began to emerge in the middle of the 20th century, when orders for oil tankers, aircraft carriers, and container ships crossed an invisible threshold. There was no longer enough time to build ships one at a time at the bottom of a dock. The entire process had to be reinvented, beginning with the order in which the work was done. The first thing to understand is that a large modern ship is not built from the bottom up. It is built in parallel, in separate sections, in different areas of the shipyard, and then joined together according to a carefully planned sequence. These sections are called blocks. A block is a prefabricated, three-dimensional section of the hull, with bulkheads, decks, piping, electrical wiring, and even internal equipment already installed. At modern shipyards such as Samsung Heavy Industries on Gyeonggi Island in South Korea or Hyundai in Ulsan, a typical block weighs between 800 and more than 3,000 tons. The largest exceed 4,000 tons and measure roughly 40 meters wide by 30 meters high. Each block is fabricated inside a covered workshop, far from the dry dock, with climate control and proper lighting for precision welding. The logic is the same as precast construction, but taken to an extreme. Instead of slowly building a steel skyscraper at the bottom of a basin, the ship is divided into roughly 100 to 300 blocks. Each block is built simultaneously. When all of them reach the correct stage, They are transported to the dry dock in a predetermined order and fitted together like pieces of a gigantic puzzle. Transportation is carried out by vehicles known as self-propelled modular transporters, or SPMTs, equipped with dozens or hundreds of hydraulic axle lines. Each axle line supports roughly 36 tons, and the transporter combinations are assembled according to the load. A 2,000-ton block may require a fleet with more than 50 electronically synchronized axle lines, moving at speeds below 5 kilometers per hour. Inside the dry dock, the blocks are positioned on rows of supports known as keel blocks. These are concrete and timber pedestals that distribute the ship's weight while it is not yet floating. A large hull may require more than 500 support points, each carrying several hundred tons, and calculated so that none concentrates enough stress to deform the bottom plating. When two blocks are joined, the connection is welded. But this is no ordinary welding operation. Dimensional tolerances are measured in just a few millimeters across structures 40 meters long. Alignment is checked using laser surveying stations and, more recently, three-dimensional scanning systems. A deviation of 1 centimeter in a bow block can become a discrepancy of several dozen centimeters at the stern, compromising hydrodynamic performance or making the later installation of the propeller and rudder impossible. One question remains. If the blocks are prefabricated separately, each with small manufacturing variations, how does the finished ship remain symmetrical, balanced, and centered around the correct center of gravity? The answer begins in a computer room that is often located kilometers away from the construction site. Before the first piece of steel is cut, the entire ship already exists as a digital model, with every bolt, cable, and valve represented in 3 dimensions. This model is called a digital twin, and it contains hundreds of gigabytes of geometric and structural information. Using that model, engineers define the exact assembly sequence, which blocks are installed first, which ones come next, where temporary reinforcement is required to support a block's own weight before the adjoining structure is in place. Each block is assigned a calculated center of gravity, and its position in the dock is simulated dozens of times to determine how the complete structure will respond when it comes into contact with the water. The first major technical crisis involving modular construction emerged in the 1970s. Japanese shipyards, which led the process at the time, discovered that blocks welded under different conditions contracted by different amounts. As a weld cools, the metal shrinks. A block welded on a cold morning contracted differently from one welded in the afternoon under direct sunlight. When the two were joined, discrepancies of a few millimeters accumulated along the length of the hull. The solution required a new concept known as weld allowance. Blocks began to be manufactured with a few extra millimeters along their edges and adjusted at the moment they were joined. Measurements were taken immediately before welding, allowing corrections to be made in real time. At shipyards such as Hyundai Heavy Industries in Ulsan, a 300-meter ship may receive more than 200,000 meters of welds during construction. Every meter of weld bead represents a technical decision that affects the final shape of the hull. Another critical problem is the ship's actual weight during assembly. As blocks are added, the structure, still resting on the keel block, begins to behave like a gigantic beam. Without proper precaution, intermediate sections of the bottom can bend even before water enters the dock. In extreme cases, this causes what is known as hogging, in which the keel arches upward amidships, or sagging, in which it bends downward in the middle. Both are permanent deformations capable of rendering a ship unusable before it is even launched. To prevent this, load sensors are installed at specific keel block locations throughout the dock. In modern shipyards, dozens of support points are equipped with instruments that measure the pressure exerted by the structure above them in real time. If one region begins carrying more load than expected, additional supports are installed, or the assembly schedule is changed to redistribute the weight. The world's largest dry dock, the Chantier de l'Atlantique shipyard in Saint-Nazaire, France, measures 1,200 meters long and 60 meters wide. Cruise ships, such as those of the Oasis class, were assembled there. The covered dock at Meyer Werft in Papenburg, Germany, measures 504 meters long, 125 meters wide, and 75 meters high. It is the largest enclosed shipbuilding hall in operation, capable of protecting an entire ship from rain, snow, and temperature fluctuations throughout the assembly process. And there is a third, subtler problem. When a dry dock contains a sufficiently large ship, the air inside begins to develop its own circulation pattern. Temperature differences between one end and the other can reach several degrees Celsius, altering thermal expansion in the steel and affecting alignment accuracy. In covered docks, climate control is as important as structural control. The current state of shipbuilding at its greatest scale is represented by the combination of gigantic docks and increasingly complex blocks. An extreme example was the Prelude FLNG facility, built by Samsung Heavy Industries at the Gyeonggi shipyard between 2012 and 2017. It measured 488 meters long, 74 meters wide, and 105 meters high. More than 260,000 tons of steel were used in its structure. When fully loaded, it displaced roughly 600,000 tons, more than 5 times the displacement of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. To assemble a structure of that size, the shipyard had to organize the fabrication of roughly 250 major blocks distributed across several workshops. Approximately 5,000 workers were involved in the operations simultaneously. The launch, in December 2013, required the controlled flooding of the dock in an operation lasting several hours. Water entered at a carefully calculated rate so that, as the structure began to float, it rose evenly, without any section lifting away from its supports before the others. Compared with older methods, the time savings represent an entirely different order of magnitude. A modern cruise ship, more than 300 meters long, which in the 20th century might have taken 4 or 5 years to build from the bottom up, can now leave the dock after roughly 15 to 20 months. An ultra-large container ship capable of carrying more than 24,000 standard containers may occupy a dock for less than 12 months, despite measuring nearly 400 meters in length. The industrial scale is equally unprecedented. The Gyeonggi shipyard handles dozens of blocks simultaneously. Hyundai's shipyard in Ulsan has 10 dry docks, each measuring up to 700 meters long, and during its peak years, it built more than 70 ships in a single year. The global shipbuilding industry delivers thousands of merchant vessels every year, and the overwhelming majority of hulls longer than 200 meters are assembled using some method derived from modular construction in a dry dock. But no one expected that. Despite all this engineering, all this control, and all this instrumentation, the most dangerous moment in the construction of a large ship would not be the welding, the transportation of the blocks, or the lifting of structures by gantry cranes. The most dangerous moment is silent, prolonged, and occurs while almost nothing appears to move. It is the moment when the dock is deliberately flooded. Once the ship is ready, with the hull sealed and heavy equipment installed, the dry dock begins filling through its gates. The water enters slowly, at a carefully calculated rate. As it rises, it exerts increasing buoyant force against the bottom of the hull. At a certain moment, the buoyant force becomes equal to the ship's weight at some support points. The structure begins to rise, but it does not rise all at once. This interval is known as partial flotation. For several minutes or even hours, some sections of the hull are already floating, while others remain resting on the keel blocks. The ship behaves like a beam supported at uneven points. If the water enters too quickly, the stern may float before the bow, or the bow before the stern, redistributing the weight unevenly across the remaining supports. Areas never designed to carry concentrated loads may give way. There have been cases in which the bottom plating deformed during this interval before the ship had traveled a single meter. That is why the flooding process is monitored by dozens of sensors. Inclinometers measure changes in the hull's angle every second. Internal water level gauges compare the depth of the water in different areas of the dock. Computers adjust valve openings in real time. The operation is conducted like an aircraft landing in reverse. Instead of something descending, something is rising, and any sudden movement can compromise what took years to build. Once the ship is fully afloat, with no contact remaining between the hull and any support, it is slowly towed out of the dock toward the fitting-out quay. At some shipyards, the entire operation, from the beginning of flooding until the ship has completely cleared the dock, takes between 6 and 12 hours. On an industrial scale, it is the equivalent of a child who learned to walk inside the house, taking its first step through the doorway. The history of shipbuilding can be told as one long struggle against a single limitation. For centuries, that limitation was the size of what could be careened on a beach. Later, it became the size of what could be assembled as a single structure at the bottom of a dock. Today, the limit is the size of what can be divided into blocks, transported through a shipyard's internal roads, and reassembled with millimeter precision inside a basin below sea level. With each leap, humanity did not conquer the sea. It merely expanded the boundary of what could be imagined as a single structure. A large modern ship is a city divided into sections that traveled kilometers before meeting one another for the first time. When the ocean finally enters the dock and lifts that structure from the ground, what floats there is not merely steel. It is the silent sum of thousands of decisions made in distant workshops, remote computer rooms, and at the desks of engineers who may never have met one another. For a ship to be borne afloat, the water must first be removed. Everything must be built in the dry, and then the sea must be allowed to come and meet it. The ship does not enter the water. The water finally reaches the ship. Look at the hull of any large vessel moored in a port. At some point, it rested on concrete pedestals at the bottom of an empty basin, beneath the harsh light of floodlights. Now tell us, where are you watching from? Leave your city in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next documentaries.